Welcome everyone to Creating D1 Athletes. Now, if you know anything about me, you recognize that this is a tremendous stretch for me because I've always told you guys that I know absolutely nothing about sports. I can barely spell the word sport, right? But because I know that I know nothing about sports, I have gotten you a phenomenal expert in the field. And today, he and I are going to tell you about the 7 key things that you need to keep in mind to create D1 athletes, to ensure that your good athletes become great athletes. So without any further ado, I bring to you the phenomenal, fantabulous Dr. Matthew Orman. Woohoo!
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. What a wonderful privilege it is to be with you. So I thank you for this platform, this opportunity to share the things that you and I are both so passionate about. And what I am passionate about truly is helping these athletes find success. And, you know, there really is nothing worse for these athletes than unrealized potential.
Yes.
You know, when they just haven't met that mark and they knew they had it in them, and injury either got in the way or, you know, something else became an obstacle. And this is what we intend to share today, is ways they can overcome these obstacles and optimize not only just their potential for going on D1 schools, but optimize. Sports are fun. You know, being with the team is fun. Getting that real feedback in real time, how your performance is fun. And so bringing the fun back to sports and then taking it up the next notch and turning good into great. And that's why we're here. So thank you for joining. Thanks for being here.
And the reality is that as much fun as it is to be able to participate in sports, it is no fun to be taken out of the game, right? And a lot of times, just like with ordinary health, people say, but it just happened. And what Dr. Orman and I are here to tell you is, in most cases, it didn't just happen. There were certain things that if we were a little bit more aware, we would have seen the handwriting on the wall and we could have taken preventative steps to ensure the resilience of our athletes. And that brings us to the first most important key, awareness. And when I speak about awareness, we're speaking not only about physical awareness, but also, especially in today's society and in today's world with all of the interesting things that are going on, we need to be aware of what is happening with our athletes mentally and emotionally. What are the things that they're saying? Listen to the conversation of your athletes. You know, I've been a classroom teacher for over 25 years, and a lot of times I kind of step back and I try to blend in like a fly on the wall just to hear conversations, to hear what they're saying to each other, and sometimes what they're not saying to each other. A lot of our athletes are tremendously overwhelmed with stress, not only from quote unquote corona drama, but from the drama of being a teenager, the drama of having the pressure of thinking that they have to be the ones to help to lead their team to glory, so to speak. So it's very important for us to look and to listen very deeply to the conversations, to what is said, to what is not said. Listen, look and see how they carry themselves. You know, sometimes pay attention to whether or not they withdraw from others. If you notice that suddenly they've shut down, pay attention. Or maybe you have a situation where suddenly you notice that one of your athletes is flaring up, you know, angry, bursts of anger all the time, or, you know, just getting really nasty with other people, seeming to have a short temper. These are key distinctions that give you insight into what may be happening under the surface, mentally and emotionally. And this is important not only because of mental emotional health, and what many of you may or may not know is that the second leading cause of death for our teens is actually suicide. And a lot of times people say, if only I had known, and yet we didn't pay attention to certain key ways in which they were communicating or not communicating. So in addition to being aware just because of the mental, emotional, spiritual health component, we also need to be aware of what's happening to them with regards to stress management because of how it affects the physiology. And I'm going to ask Dr. Orman to take it into that.
Absolutely. So important. I think awareness is that we purposely started this with awareness being number one point. And I look at these professional athletes for cues. And, it was a year ago, or 2 years ago now, I guess, NBA playoffs that James Harden, who is a guard for Houston Rockets and just a phenomenal scorer, had an off game during a playoff. And the reporters were really jabbing him pretty hard. And we're asking him, he went like 4 for 24 in shooting. So he missed 20 shots. And the reporters were jabbing him about, James, at what point did you decide it was a bad shooting night? And his response was, shooters shoot. And then they asked another way of the same question. They asked, at what point did you realize you were off tonight? He's like, I just needed to see one go in. And they kept asking these questions. And James Harden just kept coming at him with that vernaculum of, I just needed to see it go in once. And that speaks to this mental awareness, this mental approach to the game. And these guys know how mental and emotional affects their physiology. You see the routines of these basketball players or these tennis players as they approach the line for a serve or a free throw, or these football players as they get themselves ready for a game. They have to amp themselves up. So there's a physiological state they need to be into to withstand injury, really, and perform at an optimal level. And I know what's present for all of us. We've all thought ourselves into being sick or anxious or nervous, or we decide before we even go to the party that I'm not going to have a good time tonight. And guess what? You're right. You're absolutely right. And and we've had other instances where we're looking forward to it, like this is going to be a special night, and you're right. Both instances, and so there's an absolute physiology that goes with that. And if I could just take it one step further, I don't want to spend all our time on this because we're devoting entire modules to each one of these steps. So we'll take a deeper dive on each one of these, but just the physiology. Let's use James Harden as the example. Stress, when it's provoked in the mind, in the brain, we go back into this primitive area of the brain called the limbic system. And we are into a fight or flight mode. And in fight or flight, muscles will tense up. Blood supply changes. Blood vessels will constrict to make sure we're getting the blood pressure we need. Heart rate elevates. That means respiration rate has to elevate. Digestion, immunity, all these things shut down. And so for an athlete to be in flow state, whether it's practice or a game, we need their brain to be opened up into this state where they can also have access to the prefrontal cortex. They can recognize patterns before they happen. And that's the magic of understanding physiology. And I'll just say one more thing about awareness. There's also, body awareness, and recognizing early on a pain or something that's just not quite right, and leaning into that early before the shoulder becomes a shoulder issue, before the knee becomes a surgically repaired knee. There's so many signs. This body of ours is spectacular in its ability to warn us. And I'll sink in a little bit further on one of the future points, just about an example that we might all be aware of, or we may have all seen. But yeah, the physiology of being aware of our state enhances or detracts from our ability to perform.
Yeah. It's very key, as you were saying, awareness of the physiology, of the mental, of the emotional, because a lot of times we are so caught up in not paying attention to the subtle signs until they become an issue. So if we don't pay attention to the stress, and that stress could be mental, emotional, physical, then it will escalate and cause various forms of inflammation, which of course starts to break down our ability to have strong musculature. So this taps into our second key, which is resilience. And resilience is something that I learned about more when I became a licensed provider with HeartMath. And resilience, the concept of resilience is that it is the ability to prepare for, recover from, and endure any form of stressor. So when we're talking about our athletes, one of the things that we need to impress upon them is this idea of resilience. How do you have the ability, the reserve ability to be able to prepare for, recover from, and persist in the face of challenges? So we're talking about resilience, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So on a physical level, what I deal with a lot of time is helping people to identify whether or not they have certain physical reserves to be able to deal with issues. So if you don't have certain physical reserves with regards to vital minerals, such as potassium, such as sodium, such as magnesium, calcium, if you don't have those specific minerals available in the system, then you're going to further compromise your ability to perform. A lot of times when we talk about in the later segment, we're going to talk about hydration. But for here, a lot of times what we don't realize is that many people, many of our athletes become dehydrated, not because they're not drinking enough water, but because they don't have sufficient mineral reserves that give them that ability to have resilience, to be able to deal with the challenges of the game, the intensity of the game, right? Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's such a key part of this, that resilience. And you talk about bringing that back into physiology. You know, when you are able to meet the challenge, meet the stressor, knowing that you can meet that, it provides this ability to perform. And at the root of any performance, you know, be it athletic, it could be in any other environment, it's having that resiliency, the ability to raise the physiology to the stressor that's there. And in competition, that ultimately becomes it. You know, I'm a cross country coach here in Arizona, and it's so beautiful to see these young men and women compete. And we see times. We do time trials on every Thursday with our kids, and really we teach them that they're training they're really competing against themselves. So we want them to get better times each time. And it's interesting. We see, you know, my middle school students are running anywhere from 9 minutes to 11 minutes. It's kind of their sweet spot for a mile and a half. And when we go to meets, a person who's running 9:30 minutes will come in at 8:47. A person that's running 10 minutes for a mile and a half will come in at 9:30. Wow. And it's that competition that rises their mastery. And with the training and with their ability to match the stressor, their physiology meets that opportunity. And you know, we're looking at making these distinctions between good and great. And the great ones, they rise every time. And that's how you level up, and that becomes the advantage that you gain throughout your formative years.
And that's why this concept of resiliency is so powerful, because this is what enables our athletes to have that extra edge, because they know that they have built a quote unquote bank account. So it's not about how big the other team is or how fast the other team is. A lot of times it's about whether or not you have the bank account to make it to the goal, whether or not you have the bank account to push through the pain, to push through the challenge, to make it to the finishing line. And that's where that resilience comes in. And so what we're going to be talking about in the course that we're going to share with you later is, number one, how to identify through awareness what are some things that deplete your reserves for your athletes, and how to build those reserves, whether those reserves are physical reserves, and it could be as nitty gritty as certain mineral, vitamin reserves, or it can be in terms of reserves as it pertains to musculature and things of that nature, as well as building resilience with regards to our mental outlook on the game, our mental outlook on life in general for our teens, and then building emotional reserve, right? So now the next thing that we're going to talk about, the third key that we have to share with you, is the key of recovery methodology. And that feeds beautifully into what we were just talking about with regards to resilience. Matt?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. So again, the difference between good and great in my experience is the great athletes, they know how to recover. And I'll just identify a bit more. Both good and great athletes show up to practice. And show up, I mean, they're ready to play, ready to compete. Both good and great athletes are oftentimes working off court or off the field and advancing their skill and their talent. Both of these athletes oftentimes have even extra coaching or extra training. So good and great, they don't have very many distinctions at that point. There's a few of the outliers. You have the LeBron Jameses of the world and some who are just physically gifted beyond others. But by and large, the bulk of us, there's very little distinction. Where the great starts to really elevate is in recovery. And I don't know that I'm introducing a new thing to any of you, but let me just anchor down in some of the distinctions that I'm making. On average, high school athletes miss about 55% of their seasons. So we're talking, 4 years of high school. So that means 55% of their time in a sport, they miss either practices or games or typically both. And what does that mean? Those athletes that don't miss, they gain more experience. They have more game time. I'll go back to LeBron James. He recently won the MVP in the NBA Finals. And something he said was interesting, that he's never missed a playoff game due to injury. And there's no player on the planet right now that has more playoff experience than LeBron James. He's clocked more hours than anybody. And the level of mastery that he's gained with that playoff experience puts him in a league of his own. And the key that he's gained, or the advantage he's gained, has been through his ability to recover. And so LeBron James and his trainer have given some pretty in-depth interviews that I've listened to quite a bit. And two distinctions they make with recovery is rest is number one. So sleep, it becomes a part of that, but rest, and then hydration. And we'll talk about some foundational pillars where we're going to retouch on these topics. So I won't go too far into it, but just the concept and mindset of recovery is the key distinction. If by the senior year of high school, if that athlete has missed 25% less practice and less games, by 4 years, they've had 100% more experience than their peers. And that's the difference between getting into a D-1 school and not, is these athletes that have 100% more experience, game time and practice than their peers. They have every advantage, and it is exponential. It's not even close. And so understanding, having awareness, having resilience, but then really knowing how to recover the body. And I'll get into, in another step or two, talk about a formula that we use for recovery. But recovery is a mindset. And this is where coaches come in so key, and counseling with your I almost call them patients, counseling with your athletes, and knowing where they're at, and then giving them one or two steps. And it's one thing, is get some rest, drink some water. But recovery is mostly mindset. And that's the distinction between good and great in my experience.
And, in order for our athletes to recover, they have to have certain key components when it comes to the building blocks for musculature, the building blocks for having stable and balanced blood glucose metabolism, the building blocks for having balanced stress responses within the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of the nervous system. And this brings us to our next key. What I'm very passionate about is lab test, not best guess. We play this guessing game with our youth, with ourselves, and really and truly, we don't have to. So one of the things that we're going to talk more into in the modules of the course are specific tests that I believe that all of our athletes, in fact, all of our children should be looking into. Some of these tests include things like a comprehensive thyroid panel, because unbelievably, more and more of our children are showing imbalances within their thyroid systems. And as you're probably aware, thyroid hormones are very key to metabolism. And if our athletes are not optimizing their metabolism, then they're not going to have the power that they need to take it home, to take the gold home, right? The other thing that we need to start testing with our children is their blood glucose levels, their insulin levels, their A1C levels, because children are the fastest growing population of diabetics in our country. How does this relate to our athletes? Well, if your athletes are fluctuating with their blood glucose levels, again, that compromises their ability to perform on and off the court. And it also compromises their ability to maintain stable emotions, maintain clarity of mind and things of that nature, which also will impact their ability to be great athletes. Another area that we want to look into is the quality of their blood cells. So looking at certain key markers within lab panels will give us information about whether or not they have optimal levels of magnesium, optimal levels of potassium, optimal levels of certain key B vitamins that are essential to being able to metabolize their fats. And fats are where you're going to get the more powerful and potent form of energy. Unfortunately, especially in our culture at this point in time, many people are getting their energy through carbohydrates, which are a short burst of energy, and they do not sustain the athlete for those long, intense challenges. So what we emphasize and what we want to teach you is, number one, what kind of lab tests we can encourage our athletes to ask their primary care providers for, so that we can get the data that we can use to help our athletes to prepare to be resilient and to be able to recover more efficiently when they do incur any kind of injury. So now the next thing that we're going to talk about is hydration. Matt?
You bet. So I'm going to back up just for a moment with lab tests. And I think that this is such a vital point. And oftentimes, Dr. Michelle and I have some experience in this. We have patients all the time that have had blood work done, and we ask them, how is your blood work? What did your doctor say? And typically, they had blood work done and never heard back from the office. Mm-hmm. And the message, what that is putting in there, is we'll call you if there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And so no news is good news is kind of what's wrapped into our blood work or any lab testing. And so they receive that as, well, I'm good. And Michelle, have you ever seen perfect blood work? Ever?
And in fact, every single client that has ever come to me has told me that their medical doctor tells me that everything is A-okay. But what we're talking about is that fine distinction between good and great. So, your medical doctor may say everything is good, but for us, we want you to be great, which means we want you to have optimal levels for your athletes. And that is a very different way of looking at labs. Yeah. So what we do is we look at labs with a functional eye of optimizing performance as opposed to diagnosing disease, because I'm not a medical doctor, so I have no interest in diagnosing any kind of disease. I'll leave that to your medical practitioners. What I do have a desire for you to do, and what Dr. Orman has a desire for you to do, is to optimize your performance and to have optimal levels of these critical markers.
Yeah, and it just ties so well into it. And just for the optics here, when our medical doctors say that your labs look good, it means you don't have a disease yet.
Mm-hmm. Yet.
It's just, that is simply put, they'll watch those numbers. Oh, this number looks close. We'll look at it next year. And once that number gets past this point, now it becomes something, okay, now you're diabetic and now we can treat. And I'm not disparaging whatsoever of the approach, but what Dr. Michelle and I are talking about is there are ways to optimize. There's ways to be in front of this, and truly an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I don't care where you're at. An ounce of prevention will save time and money and heartache and so many things, not to mention your performance and just your well-being. And we're speaking into happiness, we're speaking into joy, we're speaking into optimizing, who you are and what you do in the world. But bringing it back to our athletes, the difference in recovery, I'm just tying lab work into recovery, you know, resting is so important, but if your body doesn't have the ingredients for healing those muscles, for healing the ligaments, for healing the bruises and the capillaries and the things you know, I call it the price of being awesome, the things that happen to you during performance. If you don't have the ingredients, you can't get enough rest to heal it. And so knowing where you're at and knowing how to nourish that is where labs come in. And that brings us right into hydration. You know, hydration has so many properties in there, but I'll just speak on one or two, and I'll let Dr. Gamble expand some more. But just simply put, you know, we are water. Our bodies are made of water. The nervous system is electricity. Every cell, every muscle, every tissue in your body is designed to conduct electricity perfectly well. In fact, one of the methods I get into the body and see where there's dysfunction is I'll look where electricity is not flowing. Mm-hmm. And where electricity goes, blood flows. Mm-hmm. And simply put, and to make blood flow, it just needs volume. Mm-hmm. So just for an example, when I was going through school, we had the Red Cross would come by every semester. Actually, we did trimesters, so we were 3 times a year. And so I would donate blood 3 times a year at least. And I got pretty good at it. And the first time I did it, there's an older student that came in about 3 or 4 minutes after they had plugged me in. And so I'm squeezing away, trying to fill my bag up. And she lays down and in 2 or 3 minutes fills up her bag and is off. And I'm unplugged, you know, 3 or 4 minutes later, I'm unplugged. And I go to the refreshment table now, and she's there still. And I ask her, how did you do that? And she's like, oh, before I do blood work or take my blood, I'll always hydrate. And so she'll spend that 24 hours before getting her blood drawn, and she'll hydrate up. And so I played with that from that point on. And it got to the point where I could get a whole unit of blood under 5 minutes. And it was just the volume of blood. If hydration increases the volume of blood, and if our blood is thick, it's not getting all the way to the end of the row. There's tiny little capillaries that literally has the diameter of 1 red blood cell. Mm. And 1 red blood cell is carrying oxygen. And so if that capillary is not receiving the blood flow, we're just not getting oxygen out to the body. And so water, hydration by itself, at the very fundamental properties, you're getting volume of blood. And as you increase that blood volume, you're getting muscles more hydrated. You're getting muscles more readily fed with the nutrients and the vital things that blood delivers. So that's a huge point that sometimes gets brushed over, because we know we should be drinking, 8 cups of water a day. And in reality, the little more precise formula is about half your body weight in ounces is where we should be targeting. And that's baseline. And when we're in performance time, it goes up from there.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I'd anchor in on, and just understanding the physiology of how hydration actually affects blood flow and affects the healing. It's next to rest, hydration is thing in healing our bodies. You know, that's above massage, that's above chiropractic or PT work, that's above any electro work that we can do to our bodies. You know, there's some really fancy machines and equipment and techniques out there, and they just don't stack up when you're talking number 1, sleep, number 2, hydration, and then the rest of the techniques are going to follow into here.
Yeah. And to also expound upon the concept of hydration, I recently heard a statistic that more than half of our children are chronically dehydrated. So again, it leads back into what we were talking about with the testing. With certain tests, you can determine whether or not an athlete, a youth, is properly hydrated. So one of the things that we want to teach you and your athletes is what are some of the signs of dehydration? Because the reality is, by the time you feel thirsty, you're actually way, way dehydrated, okay? And so we need to teach our athletes what are the signs to look for that indicate that you're moving in that direction, and also to share with them, again, the importance of hydration, why we are hydrating, and last but not least, to talk about what are some of the co-factors that we need to consider with regards to hydration, such as proper mineral balance. Because sometimes it's not just, again, a matter of drinking the water, but sometimes it may be the spacing and the timing of the water, as well as whether or not there's certain trace minerals that are available within the water content that will help with the absorption of the water. Because you can have an athlete that is drinking a lot of water and yet they're not absorbing the water because of lack of certain key minerals, and they become dehydrated, ironically, even though they're consuming a lot of water. So now this leads into our next key point, which is nutrition, because hydration is one key element of nutrition, but also looking at nutrition in the standpoint of not just quote unquote what is good for you, but really teaching our athletes to be able to discern what is optimal for an individual person. And that ties back into the concept of testing, where we're able to see where the baseline is for our different athletes and what are more optimal forms of nutritional plans that will tap into their specific biochemical needs. Matt?
Indeed. I had the privilege of playing soccer when I was in college. I played for Idaho State University. And my first 2 seasons of playing soccer, and I actually, my freshman year, I was voted to be the captain of the team, which was a real distinct honor. And for my entire time there, I got to be one of the captains of the team. And I was dedicated. I had a certain routine that I did. I worked out on a daily basis. I was religious with going to the sauna and sweating things out. And I was doing things that I didn't quite understand. I just knew that that's how I could recover better. And I was in the weight room on a regular basis, and with my slight frame and running nearly 10 miles per game on the field, I was a vegetarian. And in fact, and I thought I ate pretty clean. I ate living foods, but I didn't understand the macromolecule balance. And such a distinction early on with these high school kids, and even down into middle school, is helping them understand, what that proper ratio looks like. And you can indeed get it through a vegetarian diet, but as a single living on his own college student trying to eat a healthy vegetarian diet that's balanced, just wasn't there. And so, even though I spent, hours and hours per week in a weight room, and then more hours on the field performing, I was lean and mean, but I couldn't add bulk to it. And muscles would break down. I couldn't quite, by the end of the season, you take enough injuries and knocks and all the things that wasn't keeping up with the recovery. I didn't miss any games, but sure enough, by the end of the season, you're taping things up and you're strapping things down, and you're hurting. So nutrition becomes one of these key distinctions, that just knowing some of the basics and knowing that what each food group does. Carbohydrates do have value. We tend to kind of what's the word? We
vilify.
We vilify certain, like, fats have been vilified in our culture, and but carbohydrates have their place, and we'll sink into this deeper. But by and large, with athletes, I lean them towards doing a 40-40-20 ratio. So 40% of their diet should be proteins, 40% should be carbohydrates, and 20% should be fats. And there are other athletes, and as you start testing and getting real feedback, you start to see, like, oh, this person does better with a 30% fat, and you cut down the carbs, and there's a distinction there. But if you're doing rest and you're hydrating properly and your body's still not recovering, it's in the nutritional front.
Yeah. And, the key also, as you were saying with the nutrition, is to have that understanding that one man's food is another man's poison. And one man's ratio may be just perfect, but if you want to create that distinction between good and great, you have to identify what your perfect ratio is. And that's where we empower our athletes and you as the coaches to have a deeper understanding of how you can use simple types of blood glucose as well as ketone testing to be able to discern what is a more optimal palette, I guess you can say, for your individual athletes. So now that leads us into our last and vital key, which is, I believe, one of the most important keys, which is rest. Because there's no pill, There is no therapy. There's nothing that can take the place of rest. Matt?
Yeah, indeed. When we rest, that is when the body is repairing. There's so many old adages that we use, but we talk about sleeping on it. Give me a chance to sleep on it, or I need to take a nap before I can make this decision. I'll reference back to LeBron James. Well, he's been working with the same trainer for about 17 years. Wow. And the first question that this trainer asks on a daily basis, in season or out of season, is, how'd you sleep last night? And that's the first metric that they use. And they found through testing and through trial and error, they found that LeBron James needs about 10 hours of sleep to perform. Yeah, and this is when he's in season. And if you look at all the demand they're putting on their body, this is I compare these elite bodies to Maseratis or to Ferraris. Mm-hmm. And, you try to put 85 octane gas in a Maserati and it's not going to go. It just isn't going to work. And so these athletes, the elite athletes, have found what their magic number for sleep is. And, during sleep, the body shifted out of a fight or flight mode back into a parasympathetic state of rest and digest and heal. In that rest and digest and heal state, blood flow is optimized. The tension that was in those muscles is released, and now blood can just go wherever it needs to go and deliver the nutrients and the oxygen that is necessary for healing. During that time, tissue repair is optimizing, but then we get into the brain health. You can only go a couple of nights without sleep before you really start to feel the mental acuity slip. And, at my age now, I can't go more than a night with poor sleep without me feeling the repercussions. But these high school kids, they might push it a bit more. But during sleep is when our brain is literally defragging. And we are able to store things in the long term. We're able to kick out items that don't need to be there, and you wake up anew. The stresses from Tuesday with a good night's sleep will not follow you to Wednesday. The stresses of Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, if you're not sleeping well, will follow you into the next week and the next week. And now we're talking back into our first and second points about awareness and resilience. And that's where you've lost the game. And so, sleep is such a vital thing for these athletes, not only in their recovery, but just their mental well-being and that acuity that's necessary.
And sleep is so key, as you were saying, in terms of resetting key cycles that occur in the body, from the various hormonal cycles, such as the digestive hormones, such as leptin and ghrelin and insulin, as well as the cortisol cycles, as well as all of the different, what we call circadian rhythms. So there are certain rhythms that occur in the body with the liver, with the kidney being able to flush and cleanse, with the digestive system being able to clear itself out so that you can optimize your digestion and your absorption of key nutrients. So rest is key. And one of the things that we want to explore with you and your athletes is not just having a deeper understanding of the importance of rest, but also to start to troubleshoot for some of your athletes who may be having difficulty getting not only expansive rest, but also deep restorative rest. So some of our athletes are having an okay amount of sleep, but they're not actually getting into the deep sleep, the deep levels of sleep where you have the restoration and the recovery that is occurring. So we want to help them to be able to identify if this is happening with them, and if so, to be able to troubleshoot, to work on ways of creating a more restorative sleep. So here we have shared with you the 7 keys to creating your D1 athlete, to making sure, or should I say enabling, empowering your athletes to be able to go from good to great. We had the keys of awareness, resilience, recovery methodology, lab test, not best guess, hydration, nutrition, and last but not least, rest. So now the question becomes, where do you go from here? How do you pull all of this together? And Matt, are you going to share something with our wonderful group?
You bet. So here's what we'd like to do. Dr. Michelle and I, we want to align ourselves with our coaches. We have a level of expertise in our field, and we acknowledge the level of expertise that you guys have all gained, and the value you are in each one of these athletes' lives. And we want to lock arms with you and be support for you. We don't expect you to be medical experts. We don't expect you to even remember what we've spoken about today. What we'd like to do is be a resource for you. And so we've created a program. It has 7 modules. It also gives your athletes an opportunity to have personal counseling with us, consultation with us. We'd like to lock arms with you. And what that might look like is a coach. If you bring 10 of your athletes into us, we will extend an offer to each one of your athletes that allows for not only access to the modules, but access to consultation. And you would have access to us as well at no cost to you to consult about certain injuries, to consult about any issue that you might be having that's limiting some of your athletes from optimizing performance. And that way you can focus on what you do best and then allow us to do what we do best. And I think what we do is magnificent. We've had the privilege of watching some of these athletes go from middle school years to high school years and go on and doing really amazing things. And the amount of joy that brings not only to the athlete, but the athlete's family. And I know as a kid growing up, watching some of these athletes that competed at a college level, I idolized them. And it got me into the field that I'm in right now. And so, I have no illusion that as we lock arms together, not only are we influence the life of an individual and a family, but the ripple effect is profound. And I believe the distinction that it brings to your program only draws more athletes and draws more families. And so this is what we're offering, and would like to extend that to you. I'd like for you to reach out to either myself or Dr. Gamble, and we can set up a time to meet with both you and your teams. And we can offer this unique offer to your athletes and their families.
So the key is that we want to make sure that we meet your needs and the needs of your athletes and their families. In order to do so, we want to have a deeper conversation with you. So I invite you to reach out to Matt, get on his schedule, and have a conversation with him to determine what is the best way that we can serve you.